Hello, friends. Welcome to the Cold War Prepper. This is Lee, and we're continuing on with our civics and government tonight. So, go away. So we're continuing on. I see there are three out there. Sue Me, hello, welcome, good evening. And so we had a small puppy accident here. We have our bi-weekly meetings of St. Vincent de Paul. It used to not be a problem. We met at a different location, which is only like 2 minutes away from here. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but every time it's about 8 o'clock time to go live, 2 of the 3 dogs have to go outside. And then I have to kind of interrupt and bring them back in. Hello, Bouger Prepper. Long time no see. Glad to see you back. Welcome. Stray Kitten, welcome. Sumi, of course, we said, and Little Lone Prepper. Golly, what a great crowd. Holly Ivans. So anyhow, so now that meeting is on the other side of town. So it takes about 25, 30 minutes to get back and forth. So I came running home, got on the computer, and of course, I've done a video since then. So now, for some reason, when I do a video, it disconnects my video camera from StreamYard so that you can't see me. So I have to reboot my computer. Well, simultaneously having to reboot my computer, and I'm only got, minutes to spare. 2 of the 3 dogs want to go outside. They're barking and scratching to get outside. The third dog, I think, has a little bit of a disability, special mental disability. She kind of started laying a pile of presents for us from here through the living room. And so I had to yell for Helen, and you can still smell it, but yeah, I had to get some assistance to clean up. And so she wanted to sit with me, and no, right now she's in timeout I don't know why she can't go outside like the other dogs, but that's the way life is, I guess. Cats and Prepping, welcome, good evening. Okay, so in the book tonight, basically what we're doing is we're going over the basic principles of the Constitution, and we're remember that there are a couple of things we've talked about in the past that are kind of preeminent, and so we wanted to have we the people. We wanted to have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And so we thought of several ways that we could do that. So the founding fathers in the mid to ending 1780s, as they were drafting the Constitution, decided they didn't want a democracy because democracy was mob rule. Basically, 51% votes, yes, we want it, whether it's in contradiction to a law or not. They got it, and we've kind of seen that happening here recently in the States. People keep screaming, you're messing up my democracy. Well, we don't have a democracy. We have a republic, which means that you have majority vote, but you also have the confinement of as long as that's in accordance with the law. So you can't just automatically, well, although we have done it once or twice, we did it in order to get Obamacare. We've done it a couple other times where they say, well, forget what the Constitution says. We're going to vote on it and make it happen anyway. And so I'm surprised that those are still standing. But so when we take a look at Montesquieu, so from France, and he was in the late 1600s, late 17th century, early 18th century. He's kind of the primary philosopher around republicanism, which is what, hello, Pete, welcome, which is basically what the Constitution affords us. So when they put this thing together, they divided it up into 7 distinct articles, okay? And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about is the overarching ideas, and we'll get into the actual articles themselves a little bit later. But right now, we want to focus on what are the overarching ideas. So number 1 is federalism. So what does federalism mean? That means that there are certain powers that are relegated to the combined government of the states. But the primary powers of the states are vested in the states, okay? So whereas under the Articles of Confederation, we had a loose confederation, we needed to give a little bit more power, little bit more centralized power to the federal government, like to coin money, for post office, to declare war, to have an active Navy, an active Army, things like that. So we needed that power. So that's one of the things that we decided upon with the federalist system, was there were some things that would be, the power would be given to the federal government, and then the rest of it is reserved to the states. So some of the other basic underlying principles, number one is the separation of powers. So the people who make the laws are the legislature. The people who enforce the laws that were written by the legislature is the executive branch. And then the people who interpret the laws, let's say, whether or not they are in accordance with the principles of the Constitution, is vested in the judiciary. So we have those three separation of powers. They remained pretty much equal until the early 18th century, early 19th century, I'm sorry, when we had a case called Marbury versus Madison, and the Supreme Court voted to give itself even more power. So the Supreme Court said that they have the authority to overturn any law that they find in contravention with the Constitution. And so the prevailing for that case for that is called Marbury, Marbury versus Madison. They also believed in checks and balances. So first it goes, let's take tax revenue. Okay, according to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, all revenue generating bills must originate in the House of Representatives, except for Obamacare. Okay, so which originated in the Senate. And so in order to make it legal, Chief Justice Roberts changed some of the wording so that it wasn't a tax document as it was originally written. But he didn't have the authority to change that because that can only be done by legislature. And so by doing that, he made it legal, even though what he did was illegal, if that makes sense at all. But anyhow, so we have checks and balances. So legislature writes the bills. If the president does not sign that, it doesn't become a law. So the president has the checks and balance over the legislature as to whether or not it becomes a law. And then the legislature, of course, has to go in and override the president's veto with an even greater number of votes in order to override the veto. So they have these checks and balances against each other. The one thing that the Congress has over the entire government is the power of the purse. So, this big discussion we had about the government, if we didn't pass a budget, was going to go bankrupt and they couldn't pay their bills and everything else, which is exactly what is intended to happen. And that is if the president and the judiciary are not doing what Congress believes that they should be doing. And when I say Congress, I'm talking about the joint Congress, that is the House of Representatives and the Senate. So that's what, when I say Congress, that's what I'm referring to. So if the president's not doing what they want him to do, they have the authority to withhold money. And so he can't do anything without money, basically. So that's that whole concept of checks and balances. Of course, the Supreme Court can put a hold on certain executive orders and legislative orders and things like that. And so, we see that each party can say, you can't do that to the other. And that's part of that whole process of checks and balances. So then we have, of course, the separation of powers, legislative, executive, and judicial, three separately staffed branches of government to exercise those, and constitutional equality and independence of each branch, which is right now the Senate. Chuck Schumer wants to write a set of ethics rules for the judiciary. And the judiciary is saying, no, you aren't going to do that. You can't write our rules for us. We, according to the Constitution, we determine our own rules. Just as we don't determine the rules for how the Senate does its business, you can't determine how we do. So there's this thing going on here. Senator Schumer wants to have more control over Congress or over the judiciary. The judiciary is saying, you can't do that. That's not in accordance with the Constitution. So The executive checks on the legislature or veto legislation. They can call Congress back into special session if Congress didn't pass all the bills that the executive branch wanted. And they can either implement or fail to implement laws that are passed by Congress. The judicial checks on the executive branch are they can declare executive branch actions unconstitutional. And the Chief Justice, of course, presides over the Senate during the impeachment of a president. And we haven't seen that in the last, since Johnson in 1869, I believe it was. Legislative checks on the executive. They of course have the power to impeach. Now, impeach is the same thing as indict. Okay. So when you first impeach the president, you're indicting him. And that's done in the House of Representatives. Once the articles of impeachment are passed, then they goes to the Senate for the court hearing. Okay. And so that continues on. And at that court hearing is where the Chief Justice sits as the president pro tem of the Senate over the impeachment trial of whoever's being impeached. Let me see. Amen, cats and prepping. We have a bureaucratic nightmare in people like Christopher Wray and Fauci and others like that. Let me see. I got to take these off to read that far. Make Clover. I have a book by him. I haven't read it yet. No. So I don't know who we're talking about there, but okay. So now then, so they also can reject legislation or funding that the president wants. So they don't have to do it. If the president says, I want money to give to one of the foreign countries, and the House doesn't initiate that and doesn't, oh, Scott, welcome. So if the House and the Senate don't agree with that, then don't pass the bill to give him the money to give to a foreign country, then he can't give it to him. They can also, the Senate can override the president's veto by a 2/3 majority vote, as the House. So the legislative branch passes all federal laws, passes the federal budget, declares war, and establishes lower federal judges. That's both the House and the Senate. Let me see. So the judicial checks on the legislature are they can rule federal and state laws unconstitutional. The legislative checks on the judicial are they can change the number and jurisdiction of federal courts, impeach federal judges, and can propose constitutional amendments to override judicial decisions. Judicial branch powers, they interpret federal laws in the U.S. Constitution, review the decisions of lower state and federal courts. And the executive checks on the judicial are that they appoint the federal judges, and they can refuse to implement decisions. There's a real good book by Mark Levin, and he has 17 different constitutional amendments that he strongly recommends that we pass. Simple things like a balanced budget and things like that, and term limits, all kinds of great ideas that he has in his book, and I strongly recommend that you read it. So let's take an overarching look at the upper definitions of the 7 major articles of the Constitution. Of course, the first one establishes the legislative branch, and so it vests all legislative powers in Congress and establishes a bicameral legislature consisting of the Senate and the House of Representatives. So Article 1, Section 2 specifies that an enumeration of the citizenry must take place every 10 years, called the census, and in a manner directed by Congress. And that's what determines how the representatives are assigned. Because remember, each U.S. representative represents 30,000 U.S. citizens. So then you have to determine where those people are and determine the boundaries of where that congressman represents those people. And every 10 years, that's how it's done, is the realigning of the congressional districts. Let me see here. So it says, after a careful enumeration of 17 powers of Congress in Article 1, Section 8, and we'll talk about that, a final general clause authorizing Congress to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers was added to Article 1. It's often referred to as the elastic name, the necessary and proper clause, and has been a source of tremendous congressional activity never anticipated by the framers, including the passage of laws that regulate the environment, welfare programs, education, and communication. So they call that the general clause. So what happens is Article 1, Section 8 lists 17 things, and those are the only 17 things until we get to the income tax amendment that Congress is allowed to do. Okay, so if we take Article 1, Section 8 and read what those are, to borrow money on the credit of the United States, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the states and with the Indian tribes, to establish uniform rules of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies, to coin money, regulate the value thereof in a foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures, to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and current coins of the United States, to establish post offices and post roads, toll roads, to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to the respective writings and discoveries, called the copyright laws, to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations, to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on land and water, to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a period longer than 2 years, to provide and maintain a navy, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, to provide for calling forth the militia. And now remember, the militia belongs to the states until it's called forth by the federal government. And to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States. To exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over the District of Columbia. So that's it. That's all they're allowed to do. And yet we see them doing things like passing Social Security, Obamacare. I mean, all these other things that they've done, and they use that general clause for the good of the people. And I think that's way, way overused in our current organization. Okay, Article 2 is the executive branch, or the presidency and vice presidency. So nowhere in here does it say they have to be from the same party. As a matter of fact, for the first, I want to say 4 or 5 presidents that we had, they weren't from the same party. You elected the president and the vice president separate. And it wasn't, I'm going to say probably after Lincoln that we started having tickets, where you're voting for president and vice president at the same time. In reality, we could vote for each one separately. So Section 1 sets the president's term of office at 4 years and explains the Electoral College. Now, remember, that was changed. That was amended later after FDR. FDR had 3 terms, and so now we've amended that. I think it's the 25th Amendment. Let me check and make sure. Yeah, 25th Amendment limits that. No, wait a minute. No, 22nd Amendment. No person shall be elected to the office of president more than twice. So 22nd Amendment says that, we aren't going to have any more FDRs with 3 full terms in office, almost 3 full terms. But so we need to do that same thing with senators and House of Representatives as well. Remember when we get to Article 3 in the judiciary that a Supreme Court justice is a lifetime appointment. So can we say that there might be instances where maybe the person is advanced in age and getting like me and forgets some of the things that they're supposed to do or say, and they're still sitting on the bench making decisions, and so that's where that impeachment comes in, basically. But we should make it a lot easier and just say maybe you have a maximum of 30 years sitting on the bench. I don't know. Powers and duties of the president are set out in Section 3. So he appoints ambassadors, ministers, consuls, the secretaries that he finds necessary in order to conduct his work. Article 2 instructs the president to report directly to Congress from time to time in what has become traditionally, but not constitutionally, mandated State of the Union address that they give once a year. The Constitution only says they have to do it from time to time. They don't have to do it every year. Section 4 provides the mechanism for removal of the president, vice president, and other officers of the United States for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So the only crime in the Constitution specifically mentioned is treason, other than bribery for the president. And we'll get into treason when we get into more details of it. So Article 2 also limits the presidency to natural-born citizens. Okay. Now, I'm sure a lot of you heard the discussion about President Obama and natural-born. That there was this big hullabaloo about whether he was born in Hawaii or not, or whether he was born in Kenya. However, there is a Supreme Court decision back in the 1830s. And what that Supreme Court decision said was that a natural-born citizen must have both parents U.S. citizens at the time of their birth. Okay. So if your dad is a foreign citizen and he becomes a citizen of the United States after your birth, you're not natural-born. So natural-born citizen is somebody who is born in the United States of parents who are U.S. citizens. And I think that's where they should have put the pressure on Barack Obama, because both his natural-born father was Kenyan and never became a U.S. citizen, and his second father, his adopted father, was Indonesian and never became a U.S. citizen. So both of those fathers kick him out of that natural-born type of a clause. But that's all water under the bridge. Section 3, the judicial branch. Originally, we only had 5 justices on the Supreme Court, and so what happened was the Supreme Court was not doing things the way that FDR wanted them to. Okay, so he just changed the composition of the court, and of course, he had control. He had a same party House of Representatives and Senate, and of course, the Senate's the one that actually makes the decision. But he increased the number of justices on the Supreme Court by 4, so that his 4 appointments then gave him the majority of opinions on the Supreme Court. That's what President Biden and Senator Schumer are now trying to do again in the Supreme Court. Is they're trying to get 4 more senators. They want to change the rules so that now we'll have 13 senators, so that they can appoint 4 and then have the majority again. The problem is, once we get on this slippery slope, then every time you have a president, he's going to say, I want 4 more Supreme Court justices so I can control the court. You're absolutely right, cats and prepping. That's called packing the court. And so, some of the other things that they're trying to do is they're trying to declare the District of Columbia a state. Can't, because it's in the Constitution that it is a separate district. But the reason they want to declare it a state is because that gives them 2 more senators. So if they can have the District of Columbia declared a state and Puerto Rico declared a state, that gives them 4 more senators from that one political party, and that's almost guaranteed that they'll have control of the Senate forevermore, because it is so narrowly. I think right now it's 51-49, but if you can guarantee 4 more, make it 55-49, then you've got control. Remember, our legislative process is supposed to be slow, methodical, and judicious, okay? So that's why you have these things in the Senate rules that it takes 2/3 vote in order to pass something, except, what was his name from Nevada that was the president of the Senate, Senate Majority Leader. He got hit in the eye, blinded. But anyhow, he changed this. He on a vote of 51 votes, he changed that so that now the Senate only has 51 votes to pass a bill instead of 66. But it was only for Obamacare. Then he reverted. He kind of let it revert back. He never used that 51 vote again. And so they're trying to get that once again reinstated, so that one party can control it and it not be a consensual agreement over what is being passed. Articles 4 through 7. The remainder of the articles in the Constitution attempted to anticipate problems that might occur in the operation of new national government, as well as relations to the states. So Article 4 begins with what's called the full faith and credit clause, which mandates that states honor the laws and judicial proceedings of the other states. And it also includes mechanisms for admitting new states into the Union. Article 5, which we'll discuss later, is how to amend the Constitution. There are 2 ways, believe it or not. And then Article 6 contains the Supremacy Clause. So the Supremacy Clause provides that the Constitution of the United States and the laws of the United States, as well as all treaties, are to be the supreme law of the land. All national and state officers and judges are bound by national law and take oaths to support the federal Constitution above any state law or constitution. Because of the Supremacy Clause, any legitimate exercise of national power supersedes any state laws or action in a process called the preemption, which will be further discussed as we get further into this. Okay, and then Article 5 doesn't get into it that much. There's Article 2, the presidency. Article 3 is judicial. Article 5, Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to the Constitution. Article 6, all debts and contracts and engagements entered into upon the adoption of this Constitution shall be valid. The Constitution and laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. So that's the Supremacy Clause. And then Article 7 is concerning ratification of the Constitution. And so that was done by the 13 states. Now, there was a lot of discussion. Remember, John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and Anonymous were the 3 authors of the Federalist Papers. And they had a lot of things. Okay, this provided for a Federalist government. What it didn't do was give individual and states rights. So they passed the Constitution first, then they passed the first 10 amendments, which were called the Bill of Rights. And they're primarily based off of Virginia's Constitution and Bill of Rights. And so when we talk about the Constitution, we almost have to include the first 10 amendments as being part of that original Constitution because they were passed almost simultaneous within a year or 2 of the actual passage. So Amendment 1 guarantees 5 things, okay? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Doesn't say separation of church and state. It says Congress shall not establish a religion, nor prohibit the free exercise thereof. But it is prohibited. can't say a prayer in school. You can't do this. You can't do that. That's a prohibition. It's unconstitutional. Or abridge the freedom of speech. Now, that's only Congress cannot abridge freedom of speech. Okay. You can say you cannot say certain things in a church. You cannot say certain things in a school. You cannot say certain things like yell fire in a theater. Those laws are not being passed by Congress. And yes, those laws are legitimate and can be passed to restrict some speech. What's the intent of the Constitution? The intent of the Constitution is that somebody who believes this way on an issue in front of the government and somebody who believes this way, they should not have the ability to stifle that person's ability to speak in public. That they should be able to sway the other side with their persuasiveness and their facts, so that they can stand on a soapbox and present their facts. Let me see here. There are cats and prepping. I happen to be of that belief. There are a lot of other people who probably believe the same thing. That Benjamin Franklin probably wrote the anonymous part. Absolutely. You're absolutely right, Stray Kitten. It says freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. So for those of you who don't know, you can look it up. Where we get this thing, separation of church and state, is a January 1st, 1803 letter from Thomas Jefferson, who was then the president, to the First Baptist Church of Danbury, Connecticut. And so basically what happened was the First Baptist Church in Danbury was surrounded by other congregations, primarily pilgrims and other religions that had come over to escape England. And they felt that they were being unjustly persecuted. And so they were asking for the president to intercede and stop these other religions from bullying them. And the president said, I can't do that. I can't get involved in church matters. There is an inseparable wall of power between the presidency and religion. So what he was saying was, he wasn't saying religion can't get involved in politics. He was saying politics can't control religion. That's what was said in that. So read the January 1st, 1803, Danbury, Connecticut letter from Thomas Jefferson. And I think that'll help you clarify it, because it's very, very probably appropriately for that side, misinterpreted or misquoted quite a bit. The right of the people to peaceably assemble shall not be abridged, and to petition the government for redress of grievances. And of course, cannot abridge the freedom of the press. So the press is even constitutionally protected to put out bad info. Okay. That's just one of the things we have here. This is a key one that everybody's talking about now, and that's the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia. Now, we've had two different militia acts. Both militia acts define the militia as being a standing militia and a ready militia. Now, the ready militia are citizens between the ages of 18 and 65. So any person subject to being called up into the Army between the ages of 18 and 65 is part of this, quote, militia. Now, let's take a look at when this was written. This was after Lexington Concord, after the Revolutionary War. Everybody had a musket. Okay, they were called Minutemen. They had the musket for home defense. They had against tribes. They had against burglars, against wild animals. It was part of their hunting. It was part of their necessities. And so it says those people who were able to be called up into the militia because they were Minutemen, they would come like Lexington Concord, were allowed to have weapons, right? So it says that well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. It does not say firearms. It says arms shall not be infringed. So what is an arm? Well, what were the primary things they had back there? They had their musket, they had a tomahawk, they had a knife. Those are their arms, okay? Maybe even a sword. Those are considered arms. And so those are the weapons that are pretty much guaranteed that everybody should have the ability, probably swords. Absolutely correct, Princess Kicking Butt. It's not limited to firearms. It's limited. It says arms. Okay. Amendment 3, no soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house, only during times of peace, okay, without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war. There we go. But in a manner to be prescribed by law. So they can do it in war as long as it's in accordance with the law that they pass. Number 4, the right of the people to be secure in their persons' houses. This is search warrants and all that kinds of stuff. Amendment 5, no person shall be held to answer for capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment of indictment of a grand jury. So you basically have to be indicted before you can be tried. And this is where the Miranda decision of 1960. I get them confused. Miranda versus Arizona, Mapp versus Ohio, and Escobedo versus Illinois were the 3 big decisions. They were all between 1963 and 1968. But those were the 3 big ones about the 5th Amendment, the 6th Amendment, the 4th Amendment. The 6th Amendment says, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy public trial by an impartial jury. And to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against them, and to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. And that's where the impeachment of President Trump fell down. The first one, at least, was, if you'll remember, what they had was they had a what do they call them? Whistleblower. They had an anonymous whistleblower who told one congressman, and this whistleblower said that he heard one half of the conversation, and in his opinion, he thought the president was doing something wrong. And then they took that, which was hearsay evidence by an anonymous person who never stood up and actually faced the person he was accusing. And so that's where that kind of all started to fall apart. Because it was an unconstitutional process to begin with. Amendment 7, in suits of common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right to trial by jury shall be preserved. Number 8, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment. 9, if it's not mentioned in Article 1, Section 8, basically, if it has not been enumerated, then it's reserved to the citizens. And then Article 10 says, if it's not reserved to federal government or to the people, then it's reserved to the states. Now that Article 10 kind of had all of its power taken out from underneath of it by the 17th, I believe it is, Amendment. Yeah, 17th Amendment, which is, remember that the House represented the people, the Senate represented the states, because the senators originally in Article 2 were appointed by the legislature of the states to represent the states. So people had the House, states had the Senate. Then we had the 17th Amendment, and it said, no, we're going to elect the senators too. So now nobody represents the state legislature, everybody represents the people. Okay, just one represents for 6 years and the other represents for 2 years, which is kind of messed up. Okay. So the drive for ratification of the U.S. Constitution, federalism versus anti-federalism. Those who favored a new, strong national government chose to call themselves federalists, and those who wanted to be totally states' rights with a very weak centralized government were called anti-federalists. So the Federalists were primarily property owners, the rich, merchants of Northeast and Middle Atlantic states. These are the guys that wanted a strong central government. They saw themselves as being elite, and they saw that they thought that because they were usually better educated, they had a better chance of leading the government. Therefore, only educated people should be elected to the higher ups, to the leadership of the government. You needed a strong central government to tell everybody else, those ignorant people out there, how to do things. And so they wanted a powerful central government, 2 House legislature. And so the upper house, the 6-year house, it says here, was further removed from the people who they distrusted. The anti-federalists, however, were the small farmers, the shopkeepers, the laborers. They believed in the decency of the common man and a participatory democracy, viewed the elites as being corrupt, and sought greater protection of individual rights. They wanted stronger state governments, which are basically closer to the people, um, and at the expense of the powers of the national government. They sought smaller electoral districts, more frequent elections, 2 years versus the 6 years, um, referendums, recalls, and a large unicameral legislature to provide for greater class and occupational representatives. They were very anti-British and very pro-French, whereas the Federalists tended to be a little bit more pro-British and anti-French. Um, so that's kind of where we are with that. So that whole Federalist, anti-Federalist debate came out in a publication called the Federalist Papers. And that's where they were trying to explain the advantages of one system over another and tried to sway the people so that the people could influence their legislatures, because remember, it was the legislatures that had to ratify the Constitution, not the people. It didn't go for a popular vote. It had to be approved by 2/3 of the legislature. So, that was another one of those where it was kind of a little bit away from the people, but it still had to be sold to the people. So, what questions do you have so far? Let me get up here and see where we are. My disk is almost full. Save some space. I will try. Free space in order to continue. Okay. Let me catch up here. One day people will be able to bear arms and legs, sleeveless and shorts. Uh, yeah, I agree that the whole impeachment was no due process. It was a kangaroo court. Hello, Scott. Welcome. Uh, well, no. The 10th Amendment has never been amended, or what do you call it, nullified. It was gutted as far as its powers by the 17th Amendment, because remember, its representatives, the state's representatives to Congress, in Article 2, Section 3, I believe it is. Let me get here. And I'm sorry, Article 1. Article 2 is the president. Article 1, Section 3. Yeah. Article 1, Section 3. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, chosen by the legislature thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. So, that was the state's power, was the Senate. And then, of course, the 22nd Amendment, or 17th Amendment, I'm sorry, 17th Amendment kind of gutted that, because you want to vote the way your bosses tell you to vote, right? So if a senator is appointed by the legislature, he's going to do what the legislature, the state, tells him to do. Whereas now that he's elected, he or she is elected by the people. Now, they're more beholden to getting reelected than they are to getting reappointed, if that makes sense. Okay, let me see here. On computer, I don't like Macs. They're just too difficult for me to operate. I don't know why. I can't get my mouse to go down. I have to get on. I can't get there it goes. All of a sudden. Um, Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. There are an awful lot of people who are being held without charges, pending charges. So, writs of habeas corpus should be written for those people. But, there's an awful lot of strange stuff that's going on. And what we're seeing in our government now and what was intended to be going on in our government are two different things. And so we're seeing an awful lot of stuff right now that's kind of shady. Hello, My Prepper Journey. Welcome. No, you're fine. We're just happy you're here at any time. So we can now talk just a little bit real quickly about basically the fifth Article 5 of the Constitution, which is how to, I'm in the amendments. I don't want to be in the amendments. I want to be in the articles, which is basically how to ratify or how to amend the Constitution, I believe. Yeah. So Article 5, the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution. That's 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states. So either one of the houses says we want to propose an amendment and they vote 2/3 and they send it over to the other house. The other house votes 2/3. If both houses vote 2/3, then they send it out to the states for ratification. If 2/3 of the states say we agree with it, then it becomes an amendment. There's another process here, and this is one that's everybody's talking about right now. A lot of people are afraid of. And it says, if 2/3 of the state legislatures say we want to have a convention of states, a convention, constitutional convention, we call it convention of states, but it's properly called a constitutional convention. And 2/3 of the states have a convention and they propose an amendment and they vote on that amendment and pass it with 2/3 majority. Congress is left out of it. Congress can't do anything because remember, everything has to be ratified by 2/3 of the states. So if the states initiate it, then it's passed. And I hear some people saying, but we don't want to do that because there's a chance that the states might do something that against the people and everything else. Doesn't matter. I mean, if the Senate and the House could do it, then why can't the states do it? So I think a lot of these things that we'd like to see as constitutional amendments, I think they're going to have to come from the states. But I don't see 2/3 of the states agreeing on anything. I mean, we are such a divided country right now. We're probably 51-49 straight down. Well, actually, probably what we are is we're probably 45-44, and then the other 11% is in the middle, and that's who really makes the decisions on what's going on. Is that the neutral 1/10 in the middle? So the 17th Amendment was passed. Remember, this is right after the Civil War, okay? And I think it was who was it? Katz, I think, was the one that kind of brought it up. It's considered to be basically, I'm sorry, 22nd Amendment. Let's check for its ratification date. So the 22nd Amendment, no, that's president. 17th Amendment is senator. Yeah, 17th Amendment was passed in 1870. So basically what's happening is, I think it was Cats and Stray Kitten had it kind of right. It's associated with the anti 1860 war bills, and that is they wanted to gut the southern states of any authority that they might have in the federal government, and they did that by having the direct election of the senators instead of having the state legislatures do it. Now remember, okay, that it was the small, the laborers, the factories and everything else who were in the majority up in the north who were the anti-federalists. They wanted more democracy, and it was more of the states in the South who wanted to have a centralized government with highly educated people running it. That was Thomas Jefferson in Virginia and things like that. So we see that that's still that same, what do I want to call it? I don't want to call it a conflict, but with disagreement as far as what form of government we really want to have. And so what we were doing here is to the victor go the spoils. And so basically they passed the amendment that says, hey, now it's strange, but I think it was Tennessee. I'll have to look it up. What they did was they didn't have enough votes to pass 2/3 for that constitutional amendment around the 17th Amendment. So what they did was one of the states, I think it was either Tennessee or Kentucky, but what they did was the state never applied to become a state. Okay, just the Senate decided we're going to make you a state. That'll give us 2 additional senators, and then we'll have enough votes to pass the 17th Amendment, which is basically what happened. So we're seeing that same thing happen now with trying to get 2 more senators from D.C. and 2 more senators from Puerto Rico. I think it's Kentucky. I think it was the Kentucky Act. But anyhow, I'll have to look that up and answer that question next week. So we've got the 2 ways. Either we can amend it by starting off in the Congress, 2/3 majority of the House and the Senate passes an amendment. They send it out to the states. States have to ratify it by 2/3. However, if the states begin the process with a constitutional convention and they pass the bill by 2/3, then it just automatically becomes an amendment. Okay. What do you think? We're 5 minutes short. Is that enough for the night? Is that confusing enough? Got everybody up to that point? So I'll mark my page where I am, and this is the book we're using, American Government by Larry Sabato, and Karen O'Connor, and Alexandra Yanis. Let me see where we are in chat, and maybe there might be a couple fantastic questions. So it was Cats and Prepping who was saying, that was in response to the war. There's a lot of validity to that. I'm not going to go 100% and say, yeah, absolutely, but it sure does look that way, doesn't it? No, they will never vote for term limits for themselves. We will have to do that through a convention. Absolutely. You are absolutely correct, Diana, too. And we could have never passed presidential term limits, the 22nd Amendment, had Franklin been alive. We were able to pass it because Harry Truman signed the bill. So, yes, Straight Kitten. And for those of you who don't know, if you read the original book by L. Frank Baum called The Wizard of Oz, okay? So The Wizard of Oz is basically a story about Congress, about representation, and about our monetary system. And he was very much against, the Federal Reserve. And so if you take a look at it, Oz is DC. The Federal Reserve is the manipulator, the guy behind the curtain. The original Yellow Brick Road was gold. And Dorothy's shoes only became ruby because, if you'll remember, the first 5 minutes of the movie are in black and white. Then they came out with Technicolor. So they wanted to really show Technicolor. So they changed the slippers from silver to ruby. But the monetary system in the United States at that time was based off of gold and silver. So that's where you have the gold road and the silver shoes, and everything like that. Then you take a look at the 3 main characters, okay, other than the wizard, who is basically the Federal Reserve. But then you have the Scarecrow, who is the ignorant farmers out west, okay. You have the Tin Man, who are the industrialists, okay, those who are working in the factories and everything else. And then you had the Cowardly Lion. Now, a lot of people say the Cowardly Lion was W. Jennings Bryant, who was a very popular senator. We thought he was going to be the president, and that he was going to bring the representation, a better representation to the people who were the hard workers in the factories and the farmers and everything else. And he just never had the courage to take it up and do what he needed to do with it. So a lot of people believe that the Cowardly Lions was William Jennings Bryant. But really good book, and it kind of shows you how people, if you look at the meanings, the subliminal meanings in it, you can see that it's a very anti-centralized banking system discussion. Okay. Well, we have a couple Commonwealths: the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Commonwealth of Virginia, and Kentucky Commonwealth. But I'm not sure the difference between them either. The same thing. We have one state that does not have counties; it has parishes, and that's Louisiana. So, just different things are called different ways. I will look up. Now, let me write down a note so I don't forget to do it. Look up the difference between, if there is a difference, that significance of a difference between a Commonwealth. Okay, difference between state and Commonwealth. I'll try to answer that next week. I'll do some research on that. Oh yeah, Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Thank you, Cats and Prepping. Yeah, that's another one. Okay, what do you think? How are we doing tonight? So I don't know if you saw it or not, but Algeria has declared war on Israel. Evidently, Blinken and Erdogan had a meeting, and don't know what the results of it were, but we did have massive protests in Incirlik, where we have our nuclear weapons stored because Turkey is part of NATO. And evidently there were a bunch of anti-Israeli people trying to get onto the base and take care of that. We're having a lot of things going on in the Middle East. And so one of the things I want you to be kind of curious about, okay, if we take a look at the Gulf of Arabia, Gulf of Persia, you've got the Straits of Hormuz. So basically that's only a couple miles wide. And the Iranians could seal down the Straits of Hormuz and basically stop all shipping of oil products from the Middle East. Now, if they don't shut that down, then they come around the Horn and they come down and they come up into the Red Sea. Well, that has another narrow confining structure, and that's, I forget the name of the strait, but it's controlled by Yemen. Now it makes sense. Why was the USS Cole bombed? Why were the Iranians down there trying to control Yemen? They're trying to control the two biggest passages with the narrowest confinements between shipping of oil to Europe and the United States. And so if they can control those two, if they can control that tip of Yemen, and they can control the Straits of Hormuz, they can basically cut off the vast majority of our oil supply. Because then they would have to go across the Pacific. Now, remember, from here to Israel, basically to the Red Sea, is 8 hours now that we're off of daylight savings time. So that's an 8-hour time difference. And then to get it the rest of the way across the Pacific through the Suez Canal, which is now controlled by the Chinese, and then into our refineries, is going to take 16 time zones. So twice the distance to get here. And so it's going to become very expensive if that happens. So yes. So anyhow, there was an attempt on a power plant in South Carolina. Basically, a car tried to get through the barrier, and We don't know what would have happened. However, the pop-up barrier worked, kept the car from going into the compound, and then the driver escaped. I believe they have identified him. I'm not 100% sure whether or not they have captured him. If anybody knows if they've captured him or not, please put that in the chat. But they do know who he was. Okay, I do know that. We just don't know the motives yet or what his intentions were. But that's pretty much it. Yeah, and so the Suez Canal and Panama have both had blocks. Oh, he has been captured. Okay, great. Thank you, Straight Kitten. So yes, the Straits and the Suez Canal as well as the Panama Canal have both had major blockages over the course of the last year to 2 years. Remember that one ship that was maneuvered and then basically run aground, and so it blocked the Suez Canal for, gosh, what was it, a month and a half, 2 months. But yeah, we got kind of strange things. Do me a favor, read that book by the two Chinese colonels, and it's called Unrestricted Warfare. And basically what they're talking about is, General Flynn wrote a book about it called Fifth Generation Warfare, which is a really good book as well. But basically what they're talking about is they learned a lot watching us fight in 1991, and then of course Desert Storm, and then the second invasion in the Middle East. So they learned an awful lot about how we fight and everything else. And they said, we can't beat the U.S. in a kinetic war, so we've got to think of other ways. So they come up with this fifth movement, this unrestricted warfare, where if we take out a food plant over here and a power plant over here and a refinery over here, nobody can put those dots together, because they're all disparate instances. And so there's no logic as to how this is happening. And so people can't say, oh, that's China attacking us, or that's Iran or anybody else. So if they keep doing these individual attacks on these small things to where it doesn't really come to the attention of saying that's a gross attack, then they can basically take us out that way. And that's basically what is happening. We're seeing a lot of food elements, strange fires, strange derailings, attacks here and there, piddly attacks. But we're under attack. I was asked on Pepper Dog's channel. He put out the question, are we in World War III? And so my answer was, yes, the book's name is Unrestricted Warfare. Let me see. I think I've got it. Let me see if I have it right here. But anyhow, I forget what I was talking about. Okay, we're trying to open Word. I have a link to it. Panama is having some major issues. You're right, Holly. A lot of the South American countries, the poverty, the corruption, there's so much going on. And yeah, I think that the entire world is in turmoil right now. And we're seeing a lot of stuff going on that, is going to be kind of strange here very, very soon. But anyhow, these two colonels, they learned a lot. And so I think what we're going, I know what I was talking about. I was on Pepper Dog's channel, and he said, are we in World War III? And put your comments down below. And I said, depends on who you talk to. Take a look at World War II. If you ask the Spanish when World War II started, they're going to have a different date than do the Chinese, who are invaded by Japan, or the Koreans, who are invaded by Japan, or the Malays, or the Singaporeans, or the Micronesian islands, or the U.S., or if we take a look at Europe, when do we say that the war in Europe started? Was it the invasion of the lowlands, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, France? Was it the invasion of the Soviet Union? Was it the invasion or the occupation of Sudetenland and Czechoslovakia? When did World War II start? We have all these different starting points. I see the same thing right now with World War III. We have all these different starting points all over the place. And okay, so Amazon affiliate links. So I think we're there. When once history is written of this time, they will say that we were already in World War III. We just don't read it. We haven't seen the kinetic action of an invasion or fighting or anything like that. So um, that's where we are. Okay, unrestricted warfare. Where are you? There we go. Great book. Great book. Think you really need to read it and get a good idea of what's really going on. So it's Unrestricted Warfare, China's Master Plan to Destroy America People's Liberation Army Navy Colonels Xiao Liang and Wang Jiangsui are the two authors. Okay, that's where we are. Gosh, an hour and 5 minutes now. Okay, so remember, number 6, 34. I got another one I need. We need to do Joshua too. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace. And then, of course, Joshua was concerned about crossing the River Jordan. And God told him before he went into Israel, be strong and of good courage. And I want to encourage you the same thing. Be strong and of good courage because we're going to need it here in the near future. So do me a favor. Remember that we're all in this together. I mean, thank you for being such a wonderful family. I can't tell you how much I appreciate each and every one of you. But we do have a wonderful family. Thank you for supporting each other. Thank you for supporting me. I really, really appreciate the way that you interact with each other, the respect, the understanding, the empathy that you have with each other, and the way that we are acting in the chat, the questions you ask, the additional information that you add that I sometimes leave out. You guys are champs. Thank you so much. So be kind, polite, and respectful to each other, because togetherness is the key. I will see you tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, we're doing chapter 6 and 7 of nuclear war survival skills. So take care. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye. If I can find the buttons here.